I swear I heard someone whisper my name. Not like a voice from the TV, not like wind against a window, but a soft, deliberate voice. Close. Just behind the door of the upstairs nursery. But when I stood up, heart suddenly racing, and crept to the room. He was asleep. He was asleep. The Miller kid, Jamie, was 5 years old and allergic to dairy. That was all I was supposed to worry about. No pizza, no snacks unless it said vegan on the package, and no bedtime stories that mentioned death, war, or bees. Simple. It was a Friday night in early September. The kind of evening where summer still clung to the air, but the shadows felt longer than they should. Mr. and Mrs. Miller had left around 6:30 for what they said was a rare grown-up dinner, and promised to be back by 11. Their house was quiet, large, and clean in that minimal modern way that always made me nervous. Too much white, too many sharp corners. But I liked the money, and Jamie was easy. Shy, polite, and glued to his dinosaur app most of the evening. He went to bed without a fight, brushed his teeth, said goodnight to his toy giraffe, and asked me to leave the hallway light on, which I did. Then I curled up on the living room couch, put on something dumb and familiar on Netflix, and pulled out my homework. About 40 minutes passed, and that's when I heard it. Not loud, not scary, just wrong. A whisper from upstairs. Mike, my name. At first I froze, thinking it was the TV. I turned the volume down, waited. Nothing. I got up, moved toward the stairs, and paused at the base of them, straining my ears. The house creaked. Normal, old house sounds. The fridge clicked. Then again, Mike. My skin prickled. It wasn't Jamie's voice. It was too slow, too soft. I ran upstairs anyway, not because I wasn't afraid, but because something inside me whispered, "He's awake, you have to check." The nursery door was cracked. I pushed it open. Jamie was asleep, peacefully, tucked under a blanket, toy giraffe in hand. The glow of the hallway light barely reached the far side of the room, but I could see his chest rise and fall, slow and steady. I waited. Nothing. No one in the closet, no one under the bed. I told myself it had to be the wind. Maybe something outside filtered in through the baby monitor. Except I hadn't turned the monitor on. And there was no wind. The windows were shut tight. I went back downstairs, but the easy, relaxed mood from before was gone. I muted the TV, sat curled up on the couch with my phone in hand and my ears tuned to every sound. At 9:07 p.m., I heard footsteps above me. The footsteps weren't hurried. They were soft, deliberate, like someone walking barefoot across carpet, heel to toe, right above the living room. Jamie's room. I stood up so fast I nearly dropped my phone. I stared at the ceiling, heart thudding in my throat. I knew that house well enough to know exactly what room was overhead. The nursery. I should have run right up. Should have checked on him like any good babysitter. But I just didn't. Instead, I texted my best friend. "I think someone's in the house, no joke." She replied immediately. "What? Call the parents. Call the cops." I didn't do either. I don't know why. Maybe because it didn't feel like a person. I started up the stairs again, slower this time. The hallway lights still glowed softly. Jamie's door was still open. I pushed it wider. He was still asleep. Same blanket, same toy giraffe. No movement except the rise and fall of his little chest. But the window was open. I was sure it had been shut earlier. I remembered checking it. Now it stood wide open, the thin curtain swaying in a breeze that didn't belong. I closed it, clicked the lock. I stood there for a long minute, trying to feel brave. Then I looked down. A wet footprint. Just one. Small, child-sized, right next to the crib. I didn't scream. I should have. But I just backed out of the room, locked the door, and sat in the hallway with my knees pulled to my chest, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. The house was completely still again. Eventually, I went downstairs. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Jamie must have stepped there after washing his hands, and I'd missed it before. Right? At 10:16 p.m., I heard him call for me. Only it wasn't coming from upstairs. It was coming from the hallway closet, the coat closet, downstairs, where no one should be. "Mike," the voice said. Software just like before. I can't sleep. But Jamie's door was locked, and I hadn't heard it open. I knew he was still upstairs. I took 2 trembling steps toward the closet. My hand hovered over the knob. Then I stopped myself. I ran upstairs, unlocked the nursery door, and flung it open. Jamie was sleeping, still, deeply. Blanket kicked off now, one arm dangling off the bed. I left the door wide open. I didn't go back downstairs. I sat on the top stair with my phone in hand, watching the hallway below, my ears tuned for the sound of the front door, for the parents' car pulling into the drive. At 10:58, the headlights finally swept across the windows. The door opened. I ran down and nearly crashed into Mrs. Miller before she'd even stepped inside. I was shaking. My voice came out small and thin. "Did anyone else come back early? Anyone else have keys?" She blinked. "No." "Why?" Behind her, Jamie stirred on the baby monitor, which I hadn't turned on. "Mike," he said sleepily into the monitor, his voice crackling. She said, "I'm not supposed to tell you she was here." Mrs. Miller didn't react the way I expected. She didn't gasp, didn't look panicked or rush upstairs to Jamie's room. She just stood there, holding her purse a little tighter, her face suddenly unreadable. "What did he say?" she asked. He said she told him not to tell me she was here." I was whispering, afraid the house would somehow hear me. Mrs. Miller glanced back at the living room, where the shadows pooled in the corners. Then she stepped inside, closing the door slowly behind her. I added, "He said she, not you." "I know," she said, her voice oddly flat. "He said that before." We stood in silence. I couldn't process what she meant. "Before? What do you mean before?" She walked past me, down the hallway, paused at the coat closet, rested her hand on the doorknob, but didn't open it. "When he first started sleeping in that room alone, he had nightmares," she said quietly. We thought it was normal. First-time parent stuff. But sometimes he'd say things we didn't understand, about the girl in the walls, or someone who stood by the closet and hummed. "Did you ever see anything?" She looked up at me with tired eyes. That's the worst part. The next day, I sat in my room, trying to write it off. I told myself I'd imagined the footprints, that the baby monitor had picked up some leftover sound, some glitch or interference. But the next weekend, I got a text. "Hi, Mike. We'd love to have you watch Jamie again. Same time Friday?" I stared at the message for way too long. And then, against all logic, I said yes. That night, I brought salt, a flashlight, a printed out prayer from the internet. I didn't know what I believed. But I believed something had happened. And whatever it wasn't done. The house felt colder than I remembered. Jamie was sweet as ever, falling asleep easily. I checked every room, every closet, even under the beds. I locked the nursery window and propped a chair against the door, just in case. At 9:32 p.m., I heard the creaking, but this time, It wasn't upstairs. It was behind me, from the baby monitor. The sound of soft singing, a lullaby, just under breath. And then, she likes it when you listen. That's all. No name, no footsteps, just silence. I unplugged the monitor. I didn't go upstairs again that night. I sat in the hallway, back against the front door, flashlight in hand, eyes on the coat closet. I waited for the Millers to come home. When they did, Mrs. Miller gave me a look that said she knew I knew. I never babysat there again. But a few months later, a news story broke. An old foundation had been discovered behind the Millers' home, buried under decades of earth and wild overgrowth. The foundation of a house that had burned down in 1963, a house where a little girl had once lived, a girl who never made it out. They never found her remains. But they did find a silver locket. Inside was a photo of her and a name etched in script on the back. Mike. I wasn't supposed to move in alone. My best friend bailed at the last minute, new job offer out of state, and the lease was already signed. So I stayed. Just me, a mattress on the floor, and the quiet hum of an old refrigerator that sounded like it was sighing every 10 minutes. The place was nothing special. A faded one-bedroom on the second floor of a brownstone walk-up just outside Milwaukee. But it was mine. It had a sunlit kitchen, a narrow balcony, and a tiny storage closet in the hallway that the landlord, Mr. Feldman, called bonus space. It was that closet that started everything. The first time I opened it, I remember feeling mildly disappointed. It was shallower than I expected, with flaking white walls and a single rusted shelf near the top. It smelled faintly of bleach and something else I couldn't place, not mold, not quite dust. Like old plastic left out in the sun. I tossed a few boxes in there and didn't think twice. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I started to drift, there'd be a soft sound, not loud, not alarming, just off. Like a plastic bottle settling or paper shifting inside cardboard. But I lived alone, and I'd only brought 3 boxes total. The next morning, when I went to get something from the closet, one of the boxes had been moved. Just a little, maybe 6 inches closer to the door. I stood there staring at it longer than I should have. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe I hadn't placed it exactly where I thought I had. It happens. Still, I took a mental picture of the closet before shutting the door. 3 days later, I found a toothbrush inside. One that wasn't mine. Old, frayed bristles. Taped handle. Sitting neatly on top of my box like someone had set it down and forgotten it. I called Mr. Feldman that evening. He didn't answer, so I left a message asking if maybe someone else had a key to the apartment. An old tenant. A cleaning crew. The next morning, he called back sounding sleepy and annoyed. "No one's been in that unit since October," he said. "I gave you the only set of keys. You sure it wasn't yours?" "I'm positive," I said. "It was old, used, wrapped with tape." He paused. "That closet's always empty. Been like that since I bought the place." Later that day, I checked it again. My boxes hadn't moved. Nothing was added or taken away. But the smell was stronger. Still that chemical dust-plastic blend, now tinged with something more sour, like an old shirt left damp too long. I pulled everything out of the closet. Every box, every scrap. The walls looked the same. Cracked paint, slightly stained corners. Then I noticed the baseboard along the left side wasn't quite flush. I ran my fingers along it and felt the edge of something. A folded piece of paper. Carefully, I tugged it free. It was a shopping list. Old, yellowed, handwritten in blocky letters. Tofu, instant coffee, tuna, dish soap. Someone had scribbled a smiley face in the corner. There was no reason for it to be there. No logical, rational explanation. And yet, in the way you sometimes just know something without needing proof, I understood. Someone had lived here. Someone who wasn't supposed to. Someone who had used that closet recently. I didn't sleep that night either. I started locking the closet. I know how that sounds. But I needed the illusion of control. I went out, bought a tiny latch and a padlock, drilled it in myself even though I'm terrible with tools. Just hearing that click at night made me feel safer. Like I'd drawn a line, and whatever had been there before couldn't cross it anymore. For a while, it worked. I went back to living like a normal person. Microwave dinners, podcasts in the evening, a walk around the block before bed. Nothing weird happened. The apartment was quiet again, except for the familiar hum of the fridge and the creaks of old floorboards. Then came the knock. It was just past midnight. A single, deliberate knock on the door. I froze. It came again. Not loud, not frantic, just calm. I crept toward the peephole. My heart felt too big for my chest, pulsing in my ears. I looked. No one. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then I unlocked the door and opened it a few inches. Still no one. But down the hallway, near the stairwell, I swear I saw a shadow pulling back around the corner, like someone had been watching, waiting to see if I'd answer. I closed the door, locked it. Deadbolt. Chain. The next morning, I found the closet padlock on the floor. Unbroken, untouched. But it was open, and the latch was still locked in place, like someone had picked it and gently placed the lock on the floor out of politeness. That's when I called Mr. Feldman again. He finally agreed to come by, though he sounded skeptical. He brought a spare set of keys and a forced smile. "Probably a draft," he said, half joking, when I told him about the lock. "There's no window in the closet," I replied. "Maybe one of your friends playing a trick?" "I live alone. I haven't had anyone over." He shrugged and opened the closet. He stood still for a while, peering inside like he was looking for something. Then he ran his hand along the inside wall. "Funny," he muttered. "There used to be a door here, or something. You can see where it's been patched over. But I didn't know that before." I looked. He was right. The paint was uneven, the plaster newer in just that section, square-shaped, like someone had sealed up a doorway from the inside. "You think this connected to another unit?" I asked. Mr. Feldman shook his head. "Number that side's just insulation and brick. Unless..." He trailed off. "Unless what?" I pressed. He hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "When we bought the building in '98, the previous owner said there had been some weird stuff with one of the tenants. Guy on the 3rd floor was convinced someone was living in the walls, eventually moved out without notice. I figured it was just paranoia. Happens sometimes. Old pipes creak, mice in the walls, that kind of thing." I didn't respond. My pulse was loud in my ears again. "I can have someone check it out," he offered. "Cut the wall open if you want." "No," I said. "Not yet." He nodded, clearly relieved. After he left, I sat on the floor in front of the closet for a long time. Just listening. The walls didn't creak. The fridge didn't hum. The entire apartment was holding its breath. That night, I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard before. It was soft, repetitive, like brushing. From inside the wall, slow, rhythmic swipes as if someone were combing long hair. It came from the closet. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The brushing stopped. And then a whisper. Not angry, not panicked, just one word. It said my name. The next morning, I couldn't tell if it had been a dream. The whisper, the brushing, it clung to the edges of my memory like fog, half real and half made up. But when I stepped into the hallway, I saw it wasn't just in my head. The closet door was wide open. The lock, the latch, untouched. Still there, still intact. But the door was open like someone had gently pushed it to say, I'm still here. Inside, the air felt heavier, like the inside of an attic that hadn't been touched in decades. The scent was stronger now, too. Old paper, dust, and something faintly metallic. I should have left then. I should have packed my bags and never looked back. But curiosity is a strange thing. It makes you lean in when you should run. I stepped inside the closet and ran my fingers along the patched wall. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe some hidden panel or draft that would explain everything. Instead, I felt warmth. Not heat, not from a pipe or sun. It was like the wall itself was warm to the touch, pulsing, like it had a slow heartbeat. I jerked my hand away. That was enough. I called Mr. Feldman again and told him I wanted to break the wall. He didn't argue. 2 days later, he showed up with a contractor, and together we chipped away at the patch. It took less than an hour, and what we uncovered was a small room, cramped, no more than 6 feet by 4. The walls were bare, concrete. No furniture, no light fixtures, no windows. Just one thing. In the far corner, half concealed behind a stack of flattened cardboard boxes, was a mattress. Old, flattened, stained. Next to it was a pile of objects. Toothbrushes, bottle caps, faded receipts, and clothing tags. Trash. But the kind of trash that accumulates when someone's living in a place they're not supposed to be. Mr. Feldman swore up and down he had no idea. The contractor said the wall had been sealed off maybe 20 years ago, before Feldman even bought the building. We called the police. They found fingerprints, hair, a few notebooks, and a name. Vincent R. Doyle. Never registered as a tenant, no employment history, no credit. But there were signs he'd been there for years, coming and going somehow. Through the crawl space, maybe. We still don't know. The officers tried to reassure me, told me I wasn't in danger, that Doyle must have moved on or disappeared. But one of the officers, an older man, soft-spoken, pulled me aside on his way out. "You're lucky," he said. "Most people don't find out until it's too late." I asked him what he meant. He shook his head. "Sometimes," he said, "people like that, they don't live with you. They live around you, waiting." After that, I moved out. I didn't even pack everything. I didn't care. I found a new apartment on the other side of the city. I never told anyone what happened. Not really. But every now and then, I wake up thinking I've heard someone whisper my name. And sometimes, in the back of my closet, I find the door slightly ajar, just enough for someone to be watching.